Welcome to the channel. My name is Charles Carroll. This video is part of the PIW-CWG series, where we explore how structure, information, and persistence shape the universe, layer by layer, without shortcuts, exaggeration, or claims beyond what physics can actually support. In this episode, we begin at the very bottom of the framework. Not with space, not with time, and not with matter, but with what must already be true before any of those ideas can exist at all. This is layer zero, pre-geometry. Before we talk about space, distance, curvature, or shape, we need to pause and ask a quieter question. What has to already be true for any of those ideas to make sense at all? Geometry feels fundamental because it is the language we use to describe where things are and how they relate. But geometry itself depends on deeper conditions. You cannot measure distance unless something persists long enough to be compared. You cannot define shape unless there is a stable reference that endures through change. Layer zero is not about space. It is about what makes space possible. At the deepest level, geometry is not given for free. It only emerges when relationships between events are stable enough to be counted, compared, and reused. If nothing lasted long enough to be related to anything else, then distance would be meaningless. There would be no here and there, no before and after, no structure to describe. Pre-geometry is the condition where persistence exists, but shape does not yet. This layer is not a physical place, and it is not a moment in time. It is a logical requirement. Physics already assumes it implicitly. When we write equations, we assume that variables remain defined long enough to interact. When we speak of causality, we assume that effects persist long enough to be linked to causes. Layer zero isolates that assumption and treats it explicitly. Something must endure long enough for relations to form. At this level, we do not yet have space as a container. Instead, we have consistency. Events must obey some minimal continuity so that one occurrence can constrain another. This does not require geometry. It only requires that the universe does not fully reset between moments. If every state vanished completely, nothing could accumulate. No patterns could survive. No laws could operate. Pre-geometry is the rule that the universe carries consequences forward even before it has shape. This is why layer zero is not speculative. It does not propose new particles or dimensions. It simply states that physics cannot operate without persistence. Conservation laws already encode this. Symmetries already encode this. Stable solutions already encode this. The universe must allow something to last long enough for anything else to matter. From this perspective, geometry is a later convenience. Once relations persist, they can be organized. Once they are organized, they can be measured. Once they can be measured, distance and curvature become meaningful. Geometry is not the origin. It is the bookkeeping system that emerges when persistence becomes structured. This also reframes the idea of before space. Layer zero is not claiming a time before time in a narrative sense. It is identifying a prerequisite. Even the earliest models of the universe assume consistency. Even quantum descriptions assume state continuity. Even fluctuations require a background of persistence to fluctuate within. Without that, there is no physics to write down. Another way to say this is that layer zero defines the minimum requirement for memory without memory itself. Nothing remembers deliberately. There is no archive. But the universe does not erase everything instantly. The fact that entropy increases tells us that the universe keeps track of what cannot be undone, that bookkeeping begins before geometry. It begins with irreversibility. At this layer, there are no directions, no metrics, no dimensions, but there is already filtering. Some configurations survive longer than others. Some transitions are allowed, others are not. This quiet filtering is what eventually gives rise to structure. Persistence does not need intention. It only needs duration. Once duration exists, relations can stack. Once relations stack, geometry can emerge as an effective description. Space is what persistence looks like when it becomes organized. Time is what persistence looks like when change becomes ordered. Layer 0 is the condition that allows both. This is why the PIW-CWG framework begins here. Not with matter, not with energy, not with spacetime, but with the requirement that something lasts. Everything else builds upward from that constraint. Geometry is not the foundation. Persistence is. This was layer 0, pre-geometry, the quiet condition that allows anything else to follow. If you made it this far, thank you for taking the time to listen carefully. These videos are meant to move slowly, on purpose. The goal is not to rush toward conclusions, but to understand what physics already assumes, and what those assumptions quietly imply. Thanks for listening. In the next episode, we move into the first layer where structure begins to take form.